The meeting of the Kingston Springs Regional Planning Commission will come to order. Roll call, Keith Allgood, Tony Thompson, Tony Gross.
Here.
Mike Hargis.
Here.
Lauren Hill. Here. Mike Patnode.
Here.
Craig Kitch. Marie Spafford.
Here.
Bob Stoller. We have a quorum. Sharon Armstrong.
Here.
Peter is not here. John Lawless.
Here.
Okay. Motion to move the February 9 meeting.
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Motion to approve the meeting agenda for March 14.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Note in the meeting that it says February 9 and it should be March 14.
Copy will be corrected.
Thank you. All right, glad to see everybody here. This is the part where we have community input. It is limited to 3 minutes for all regular agenda items. And if there's anyone who would like to speak. If not, the community input is closed. Okay, declaration of conflicts. In the event that a member has a personal interest in a matter before the Planning Commission, they shall disclose their interest. If not, we shall move forward. Old business. Ellerslie PUD update?
Yes, ma'am. We received the plans, the final set of plans with some corrections to the driveway location at the front with some improvements for drainage. Drainage, as you know, we had a long discussion in the Planning Commission about where the water goes across the road. So those came in too late to get them on your agenda to advertise, so they'll be on your agenda next month for approval. If you'll remember, Planning Commission voted to allow staff to approve them so that the project can move
Correct.
forward before the heavy rain, so they wouldn't increase the issues on the site. That occurred, and then we'll bring them back to you for formal approval so that they will be permanently approved by the Planning Commission in this aisle.
That's so
Work
good.
continues. We do still have some complaints. There are a couple of bills going on. There's some complaints for trash that's going off site. So I will share that with the code enforcement officer so that he can address that in the future. Failing that, that's all we have for that. I want to see if anybody has any questions.
Questions, comments? Okay. The Golf Course Tennessee update on the maintenance facility, proposed site plan, performance bond requirements.
Yes, we had a complaint from one of the residents that lies adjacent to the golf club. There was a recent very heavy rain several weeks ago. Water did displace dirt into the creek. It did make its way across the road at the four-pipe area, so I directed Ms. Rose to both TDAC and the county, since that's in their jurisdiction. And then I noted that to the golf club of DBI, where the work was going. Spoke to Mr. Hooper. Mr. Hooper, who's the engineer for the project, relayed that they had traced the entire soil and erosion in that area all the way up to the top of the hill, could not find the exact location of the breach. But they seemed to think, the soil and erosion expert seems to think the water was just so intense for several hours it overwhelmed the catchments that they had in place. So I have asked them to share the EPSC reports for the previous month. Normally they share them all with me. I didn't get those. That will give us a little more insight into what's going on the site. But it appears to be corrected now. The complainant was not particularly agitated. She was a little bit alarmed by the stream. So as we have discussed previously, that's enforced by TDAC. It's their permit. All we can do is note and follow up.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I did need to add to that. We had a discussion with the Golf Club of Tennessee. The location is the maintenance facility. Briefly to update the Planning Commission, that was deferred several months back because they needed to work through an easement agreement between the Golf Club of Tennessee and the Priscilla Doris Property Trust. For that project, they presented a site plan which we tabled because the easement agreement has to be in place before that can be considered. And since the bridge has been replaced, they are no longer taking the detour, obviously. It's much shorter, so they're taking the city section of the road out to CC Road. So we had a discussion with them today. It was very positive in nature. I would say that's a fair statement, John, where we will provide them with a performance bond form. We will have the paving contractor for the city that customarily does paving calculate the cost per linear foot, and then a performance bond will be put in place for the construction phase of the project from the exit of the maintenance facility where the gravel road exists now, all the way to CC Road. So that will be put in place for the construction phase. When the site plan comes off the table, comes back to the Planning Commission, there will be some road improvements that will be required by our ordinance. That location, the road width in that location is slightly under 17 feet. So when you're turning out a dump truck or a large vehicle, you can't stay on the road surface, on the turnout. So what's happening is they're going into the ditch line on the other side of the road, and because that's never been a formed driveway, it's just gravelled in, it's compromising both ditches, which in turn compromises the flow of water going down the road. So given the location and the number of cars that will be coming in and out of there, they have 65 parking spaces on that plan. It's where their maintenance for the golf clubs, both of them will park, and there's an office space there as well. And Peter and I are going to meet the engineer along with John and discuss what improvements may need to be made so that that's no longer an issue for the road. So just an update to let you guys know.
Okay, well, that will be on Kingston Springs?
That will be on South Harpeth Road.
Right.
Right.
But the Kingston Springs portion?
That's correct. It's
Okay.
on the city's portion of the road. We don't have any control over the county portion. It's my understanding the performance bond that was placed with the county has been satisfied and done. Now, the county is making some improvements at the Fort Pipe area, which is in the county. The Fort Pipe area, that's the source of so much discussion. I believe they're putting some culvert improvements in there as we speak to make that 4 pipes chained together kind of restricts the flow. One big culvert may eliminate most of the flood problems that they have in that area.
Great.
All right, that's all I have on that.
Okay. Any other questions, discussion? Discussion of sidewalks from the Ellerslie PUD to downtown Kingston Springs. An update, please, ma'am?
Yes, ma'am. As you know, this was recommended to us by the City Commission to explore having sidewalks come from the Ellerslie project to downtown. I was assigned the task to explore where phase 1 ends, almost at that juncture. Most of the residents who walk are taking a pathway through there and through the condos to go and come out on the side of Turnbull provisions. And I believe John was going to look at the other assignment for going down West Kingston Springs Road. As we covered a couple of months ago in here, we have safety concerns about coming here, plus the city would have to acquire right-of-way across these properties from here to there, which could be prohibitively expensive. We had a conversation with the folks at Ellerslie. They are perfectly amenable to allowing a sidewalk to come off of that project in that location. I have sent an email to the HOA representative for the condos next door, which would be the next natural connection because they have sidewalks in front of their buildings. He is going to schedule a meeting with his board so they can discuss it with the HOA board so that we can move that step forward. If that step progresses, then we'll have a discussion with Carl Francis, who owns the rental house, the brick rental house. That's the third property up. That in turn will get us from the development all the way to the sidewalk on the side of the commercial complex at Turnbull, and it'll be a seamless connection and bring them out in an area that I feel is much safer than traveling this road here. So that's where we are on that project. It is moving forward slowly, but it's moving.
Okay, good, good. Any other questions for anybody? No, chatty group tonight. Okay. Discussion of revision to the zoning ordinance, Article 3.100, accessory uses. Update on that?
There's not much of an update. I'm still trying to flesh out all of the impacts that the change would have. The accessory use regulations impact the zoning ordinance in more than 31 separate places. So as we work through trying to figure out a way to allow more use, then we bump up against not only the other sections of the zoning ordinance where there are limitations on lot coverage and on all sorts of other things. And as we try to work through the HOA or covenants and restrictions for several subdivisions that lie within these zoning districts, we can't write anything that minimizes the covenants and restrictions or any restrictions that are privately placed. We have to look at lot coverage. I think I used last month R1A, where people bought larger lots for the purpose of getting further away from development, and not all lots in any district. And R1A is a classic example. We have lots as small as half an acre, and we have lots as large as 6 acres. So doing it on a percentage level becomes cumbersome. And in some cases, if we increase the percentage that you can use based on the zoning district that you're in, it bumps up against the lot coverage restrictions that people buy those lots for, and in some cases, it bumps up against covenants and restrictions. The Woodlands is a classic example. They restrict all accessory uses on a lot to 900 square feet. We can't write anything that allows something that they prohibit. The appellate courts have ruled on this on several occasions across the state. Whichever is more stringent applies. So we can't undermine their covenants and restrictions with something that would allow a broader use than they allow. So that's where we are in the process. It's just trying to wrangle all of this language to make sure that it's seamless when it goes in, and one section of the ordinance doesn't contradict the other.
This whole project, like to do this, I question how needed it is. That's-
I don't really know how to address that, other than there are cases that
There are
we
a few
address where the circumstances are unusual. And I think the last time this was heard tied to a particular property, the unusual nature of that circumstance was that, one, the structure in question was never permitted. There was never a permit for it. It may have been done before the zoning ordinance restricted accessory uses. It's impossible to tell. But we have a section in our zoning ordinance that if your structure or something on your house is damaged as the result of a natural event or disaster, in this case it was a tree fall, then you're allowed to put it back. But the non-conforming usage within the zoning ordinance does not allow you to expand the size. You can keep it. It's grandfathered, you've heard that term. Grandfathering and non-conforming have some commonalities legally, but they're not exactly the same thing. So it's been kind of a process to figure it out.
I
Yes,
do have a question,
certainly.
because I think I misunderstood, but, so you use the Woodlands as an example. I think they're limited to no more than 900 square feet for accessory use, is that what you said?
That's covenants and restrictions for
Okay.
a particular subdivision.
But for the town of Kingston Springs,
It's 50% of the
right,
size of
so
your-
that 900 doesn't affect the rest of the town?
No.
No,
Just within that
Just
HOA.
them, okay.
Just
so more
within the
restricted,
Woodlands.
So-
And then
So the idea of trying to get one
one
to
to fit
the entire
everybody's
city
circumstance is
I
very
got you.
difficult.
Is-
So back to the 50%.
Kinda like whack-a-mole.
Another example is Harpeth Meadows. They don't restrict the size, but you have to have approval from the HOA before you can put any structure in. And while we don't police that, we don't enforce HOA restrictions, we can't violate them. We can't issue a permit in controversion to them. That's what the appellate cases were about, which one takes precedence. So it's becoming a very tangled process to try to get all of this in place.
But if
On-
there's not a HOA in force in a subdivision, or it's not in a subdivision, then the ordinance rules apply. So,
They do,
okay.
they do.
So anytime we have a problem with that, it's being outside our ordinance is if the HOA restricts it more than we do. So,
In some cases, in all cases, not so much, Commissioner Harris. In some cases, it's that the applicant buys a lot, it has accessory uses that are existing, then they want to add accessory uses.
I got you.
And
Okay.
so it then
It
exceeds.
gets it outside the ordinance.
It's
Okay, well,
outside the ordinance.
That's pretty cut and dry, yeah, I
Right.
mean, I get that.
And then if we change it, let's say we made it, some jurisdictions do as much as 75%. We also have lot coverage, everything on your lot. The larger the lot, the less intense the district. R1A is our least intense district. The less intense it is, the greater the restriction on lot coverage, because people buy those lots with the understanding that they're only allowed to use 25% of that lot for coverage. Now, that's not your driveway or anything you have to have for infrastructure. It's just accessory uses. So it's kind of the theory, and I had an attorney make a comment. I was discussing it with a friend of mine who's a land use attorney, and he said, you buy the lot with restrictions on it. And those restrictions and any changes to those restrictions or to the zoning ordinance doesn't just impact that lot, as we've discussed multiple times. So as we have a lot, a triangle lot right down here in the Y of the road, very small lot, but he's in an R2 district, which allows a certain 50% accessory use. In his particular case, he couldn't get one on there if he tried, because the house is going to take up the entire footprint of that lot, just the footprint of the house. So it varies from space to space, lot to lot, so it's very difficult to write.
Well, that kind
Something.
of brings us back to Tony's comment that is this really, do we need to try to get a one-size-fits-all?
Or do we need to change
Ordinance.
current code, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, or do we need to change current codes?
Do we need to change it or leave it?
I think that as we work through the lot sizes in the districts, we're gonna bump up against lot coverage in almost every circumstance, or we're gonna bump up, not all houses are in HOAs, as Commissioner Patino pointed out, but within the core of the city, most of them are. As we go out towards R1A, you are allowed, because it's an agricultural district as well, and the state insulates agricultural activity, so you're allowed to have a barn for the keeping of livestock because it's required by state statute that your animals have a place to be housed. So those are already built into the ordinance for those allowances. But for the pleasure or use of the resident for a hobby, or it would not withstand a challenge legally if you were to write it to accommodate that type of use, because it's not an entitlement use. It's an accessory. It's an addition to what you bought the lot with.
But if Sharon, if we decided to go beyond 50% of the footprint of the house, counting all the covered stuff that's with attached garages or garages attached by a shed to the main house, if we would decide to go beyond that, it would still apply on a lot-to-lot basis if the lot were too small. It applies now at 50%, so we said, well, you can do 60. And if you did that,
It will,
now you're still gonna have case-by-case basis where you got too much
Absolutely.
coverage or too small a lot. I mean, that's gonna happen at 50%, right?
Yeah, no matter
So-
what.
I would say the distinction is, and I agree with you to a degree, but the distinction is, if you take as an example R2, where the average lot size is 0.34 acres,
Okay,
and it's restricted for lot coverage. If you increase it to 60% of the residential structure, and somebody built a 3-story house that just happened to be 12,000 square feet, you don't have 6,000 square feet on that lot to put anything on.
because
So-
now the coverage issue is gonna block it. It's also in the
Well,
code.
not only
But
that,
but if you happen to have a lot that was big enough where if you built an 8,000 square foot home and there was enough room that it wasn't a coverage issue, you know, would it make much difference if it was a 4,000 square foot accessory or, 60% of 8,000? See what I'm saying?
yeah, I think the challenge that's mounted most frequently when you do that is because you can't apply it to everyone in the district. In other words, you're giving a benefit to certain people within that zoning district that cannot be available to the other people. We have some,
If they got a small lot, I mean, it's a moot point anyway because of the coverage issue. So
well, it
what
can be.
I'm saying is, no matter where you set the bar,
Mhm.
50, 55, 60, whatever that percent is of the square footage of the house.
Right.
The footprint.
Right.
If it's a small lot, then you're probably gonna have a coverage issue that's gonna overrule the 60% anyway.
In a
Right.
lot of cases, it will.
Okay, so, you know, most of the lots in the town are, except for these right down here, are you know, fairly decent size. So, you know, I guess, I'm not saying I'm for changing it, I'm just saying that I don't see the issue, because you got the issue whether it's at 50 or 60.
Right.
I mean, to me, you do.
You do.
That's,
You
we're all,
do.
So
But-
if you increased it a little bit to accommodate people who wanted a little bit bigger accessory, and they had the lot room to do it, I don't see what our problem is.
I think
Maybe
that,
I'm not seeing it,
I
but.
think that the statement, and that's kind of the problem with it. If you do it on a case-by-case basis.
That's not what I'm saying.
I understand what you're saying,
Okay.
but you have changed it. Then you have, for people who have bought in divided subdivisions, you have then given advantage to some people within that subdivision that is not available to other people. When these plats come in, they are established and drawn and approved by this commission, by the planning commission in the city, on the circumstances, then they're built out. All of that is already done. Lot coverage, setbacks, all of that's already in place.
right.
So then when you change it, you then are in the position of accommodating some people at the expense of others. So
You know,
it becomes,
I'm sorry, are you just referring to people with larger lots?
it does. And what
Okay.
happens in those circumstances, as an example, we have R3 here, we have R2 in Kingston Park, we have R2 on all the city lots here. And duplexes are allowed in R2, and most of the lots aren't large enough unless you did one over the other, that you could get them in. So there is the potential for doing that, but the state law prohibits us from writing ordinances that allow an advantage to one person when it doesn't apply to the entire district. So that's why they're the way they are now. It was limited at 50% in R1, it was limited at 50% in R1A, because those are larger lots. Lot coverage is restricted in R3 and R2 to a much lower number for that reason, because it makes it level across the district. So it just becomes, you're either gonna bump up against one or the other. So if you're gonna do an increase, you could consider that in R1A for your largest lots. But what do you do about the outliers, where back in the day, somebody allowed them to chop off a quarter of an acre for the kid to build a house on, and now you have the same issue in that district, where he's never gonna have an accessory use that's available to somebody else. So it's not that it's impossible, but when you write it, it has to be, you have to be able to withstand the challenge of some of the challenges with the neighbor next door.
Is it necessary? I mean, that's my bottom line, is
Just even
we're working
changing
so
this at
hard to
all.
make a change because somebody wanted to change. Is it really going to impact
Well, that's the kind
things
of the
going
point.
forward?
That's kind of the point I'm trying to make. We're prohibited from making changes in response to a particular situation.
Right.
Then we're prohibited by law from doing that. If we want to consider it for the zoning districts as a whole, we are still going to have districts where it's not going to be possible to do so, because they were allowed to build in very tight footprints on very small lots when they first did the subdivision. The other thing that has to be considered is that to accommodate larger percentage on some of these lots would have to reduce the setbacks which were established. You bump up against that as well, and the location of it. Then we have areas where we have septic systems as opposed to sewer. Sewer tank takes up space, so we have to take that into account. So
Well,
it becomes,
to be fair, every lot has a sewer, has a septic tank on step system.
well, but some of them have just the tank, and some of them have a tank and lines.
And lines, I guess.
So you can't put anything in the area of the drainage, so it just becomes,
So it just would seem to me, as I'm listening to all this, that the restriction, whether it's 50, 60, 75, is still subject to other restrictions,
It
whether
is.
it's septic, whether it is setback. So in my mind, it's kind of a, okay, if these other restrictions don't come into play, then this is acceptable if it's in the ordinance. And it's not a simple one size fits all answer, you just look at the other restrictions, right? So I don't see it as as I'm listening to it, I don't see it as an issue. And I'm not saying I need it to
So
be
if you
75%.
completed it to, yeah, if you raise the percentage, it shouldn't be an issue, because it would be 60%.
Subject to
Subject to
setbacks,
whatever
subject
the
to
other-
sewage,
Right.
subject
That's what I was
to,
trying to make.
subject to
Yeah.
I
lot
think-
coverage, and so therefore, if we decided we wanted 75%, and I'm not opposing I do, but if we did, it doesn't strike me as an issue. If you have a lot big enough, and you can meet your sewage and setbacks, and you can meet your lot coverage, okay,
Right.
then it applies. So it doesn't strike me as hard, because,
Oh, I don't think it's that it's difficult. I think what you're gonna bump up against is complaints. People buy it, they expect to have a certain distance on that lot between them and anything else that can be built when they buy that lot.
right.
Then when you change that circumstance,
The setbacks, though, would still apply,
Yeah.
would they
the
not?
setbacks, but the coverage of the lot, in order to increase
Oh.
that in the smaller districts, it's just not viable in those. So you could do that, that's what I was saying, in R1, you could probably do that with very few exceptions. In R1A, you could probably do that. But on these very small, tight footprint zoning districts, you're gonna get blowback. If you manage to slap that on, you know, you increase that to the point that somebody can put a bigger, it's in the neighbor's face.
And so
So-
it can't just be on R1 and R1A and not on the others?
The others are gonna be too difficult to work around because most all the small lots are on sewer. So we have a sewer tank, we have a driveway, we have setbacks, we
I
have all
understand.
the other appurtenances.
I understand, I'm just saying, could it just apply to the larger lots?
Could we just apply it to the zoning district?
You
So,
could. You
within
could
one
increase
A
it
and with
and-
one,
That's why I'm saying that while I understand the driving desire to use more property,
I think that
You're
the
gonna-
issue we're probably gonna run into is the cases we've run into recently are in R2, I believe, aren't they?
they are,
Yeah.
they are.
Which you can't do, so.
We can't,
And there's no
off.
real push for, I don't know that anyone has come to this, to City Hall asking for any changes in R1 or R1A. So we're really talking about an R2 issue
R2 and R, well,
They
R3.
can't-
That can't be resolved.
that can't be resolved.
Right.
No. And that was the point I was saying, if you're R1 and R1A, so you could pretty systematically allow that increase across those lots. There's a stray random lot here or there that would not comply in those districts. Then for livestock or agricultural use in the district, it's already insulated by state statutes, there's no need to address that. And anything above 4.99999 acres, you don't get to regulate anyway. It's not a subdivision, so you don't get to touch it. But on these tight, small space lots, you bump into so many corners.
Well, I understand that, and I mean, I understand why that ordinance is in place, because you can't get outside of the septic tank areas and lot coverage. I get all that. But by the same token, with a 50%
Yeah,
limitation
been prevented
of your
anyway.
square footage, you're limiting someone with a larger lot, of putting in a larger accessory, by saying, well, it's all ought to be 50%, you know. I guess my whole point is, you move it to 60 or 75 or whatever, if the board took that approach, you really haven't changed anything on the small lots. They're still pretty
Yeah,
restricted.
just put it on
All
R1
you're
and
doing
R1A,
is
and the rest of it
All you're doing is saying
is
that.
is already gonna be impacted by other covenants and
It
restrictions.
was pretty much because of the size of the lots and all of the things that are required to service that lot have to be, just for R1 and R1A.
And kind of coming back to my initial point, and Lauren's, and I'm sorry that it's my
That's
fault we
okay.
spent this much time on this, but it sounds like this whole process is what I like to call a solution in search of a problem. Like, I don't know that the problem exists within the current zoning to
Well, I
to make
think
this
that
change.
I think that the complaints that we've had are pretty much limitations that regardless of what we change,
We'll still
it
be
did
there.
not address the issue.
Okay.
So that,
Then,
kind of
then
is a
let's move
reluctance.
past that, and
Right.
if there's a need for something else, we will. Otherwise,
exactly,
Let's
and I
just
think that
table
the
it.
other thing that needs to be considered is that
what do you think?
zoning has
Sounds
kind of
good to me.
specific definitions, and all accessory uses in terms of use, size, and occupation have to be subordinate to the principal use of the lot.
Table
which is why you don't see many of these restrictions on commercial or industrial, because the use of that lot is varied, very varied. But in residential, the primary use is defined by law as the principal structure.
Right.
So everything that comes on that lot after that principal structure has to be subordinate in use and in size. And those are two entirely different things. Square footage is one thing. I'll give you an example. Say I have an acre lot.
I think we probably all are comfortable with the concept and what we're dealing with here.
Okay, good.
You know, thank you.
You're welcome.
From my perspective, my question is, why are we moving forward with this constant discussion if we are in fact searching for a solution, or searching for a problem in search of a solution, or however Tony said that?
Well, I
It
think
was very
that,
good.
A
Solution
solution in search of a problem.
Yeah.
I think that there are two reasons. One, that it was forwarded to us by the city commission to give
Okay,
it our
can we not
attention
just
and
table
time.
it?
And we can, you as a planning commission make these decisions. You know, I work at your direction to provide what you think is appropriate, so.
It's just my thought that this might not be a valuable use of
Our
your
time.
staff hours.
Right.
You know, I don't know, so.
It's been an interesting pursuit, I will say, trying to find a way to frame this and still keep us within the lines that we're required to stay in.
Can we poll the commission? See if we wanna,
You may-
Pursue it.
Or we could just have a vote.
A vote? Is there
vote to
a
see if
motion
we would
to-
like to continue to pursue. I make a motion, to no longer pursue this.
Yeah.
is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Motion to no longer pursue this, and a second? Is there any further
Yeah.
discussion?
So we're returning it to the city commission? Was it given to us by the city commission?
Well, I mean, we're just,
I think
I think we're
it was
just
more to
gonna-
explore, not necessarily, we weren't directed.
I mean, it's been explored, I think, and Sharon's
We
given us
were
a pretty
asked to
good.
explore and then bring back to the city commission the results of that, so whatever
Oh.
your decisions were. And
Okay.
how you know, that was the whole purpose of referring it to the planning commission.
Well,
so that it
it's
would
just,
be vetted.
in I mean, the way I see this, when we look at all the restrictions, I just don't see how this is even a workable solution for the issues that have
Right.
arisen around
It's not
this. So
viable.
like, I don't know why we're going to spend time and resources, other than the about half hour we've already spent on it tonight. And I apologize, that was my fault for doing
No,
this, but I think
the
we need to
discussion
probably,
needed to
might be a
occur.
time to nip it in the bud
Yeah,
right
the
now.
discussion
so.
needed to occur.
Well, wasn't coming from the, city commission, wasn't it discussion or revision to the zoning? We've discussed it.
We discussed it.
Yeah,
Okay,
We've
So-
decided there's no problem.
okay,
Yeah, so
So-
I've made a motion to no longer pursue this.
right, is there any other
There's been a
discussion?
second.
Is there any other discussion?
No.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to no longer
Pursue.
pursue this. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay.
Item F, E, I'm sorry.
E, Roy B. McPherson, The Willows, 129 East Kingston Springs Road, core drill update.
Brief update. I received notice from the engineering firm, the geotech engineering firm, 6 weeks ago, that the core drill process was completed and the report was rendered and given to Mr. McPherson. We have yet to receive it. So I have requested that they forward that to us so that we can review it. And do you want to discuss the conversation that occurred, or since nobody's received anything?
We haven't received anything.
Okay. I'm just gonna leave that laying there, but at this point, the planning commission approved the core drill locations. The lab report was to be produced. That was finished and completed 6 weeks ago, and the applicant has chosen not to share it with us thus far. So I have made another request, excuse me, that information be provided to the planning commission, reminded them that it was a requirement rather than a request.
So just as an update, because of course last month we voted to not renew the PUD plan for
Yes.
this project. So, and of course we still need the core drill update.
Right.
We need that data still, and of course, so where do we stand with this right now? I guess has there been no response from the applicant, or are we?
I have not spoken directly with Mr. McPherson. I've spoken to the engineer.
Okay.
And that is not an unusual circumstance in the long history of this project when things are not going as Mr. McPherson thinks they should. He just kind of walks away for a while. So that's where we are right now. I will follow up again and request that information. He has not granted them permission to release it to me,
Okay.
the engineering firm, so I can't get it from them. But what comes next was the question. This is now purely depending on what's determined in that report. It will either be, okay, we're good, it was done, there's not anything there we need to worry about, it's going in our water stream, the ground is stable, and we're not subject to the whole back of the hill falling off. If that is the case, then we just close it, it's done. Permit's closed, everything's done, we just stop where we are. If that is not the case, it becomes an enforcement action, much as it did the first time.
But also, that lot needs to be returned to some sort of something besides a dirt spot, right? Or can it just
That
be
will
left as a
happen.
dirt spot?
It will have to be, that will be one of the requirements of enforcement, is that they be flat graded and cleaned out. So that is kind of that. The downside to where we are with this project, is, as you know, Ms. Downs, access to her property lies through that construction road on that property. And if that is cabled, then it's gonna have to be uncabled, because he can't deny her access to her property through there. So there have been a number of changes over the gate being opened by people, and the horse getting out, and some other things occurring that have happened up there. But it's, for us, it's simply a matter of saying you can't close that exit and that entrance. It cannot be cabled, it cannot be locked. And then the ground returned to somewhat of a flat state, and all of the debris that is not necessary is removed, and it's left and life goes on. There will power to be seeded and destroyed. Soil erosion is part of the requirement.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, new business. Recommendations by the Town of Kingston Springs City Commission. A, Nobel Signs, 121B, Liven Hills Road, considerations of signage, recommendation of the Design Review Committee to the KS Regional Plan Commission.
First step.
A motion to recess to review the recommendation on the signage.
It's a motion to recess so that Design Review Committee, which is the Planning Commission, by the way, can consider this project.
Is that
So
what I said?
moved.
Thank you. What else?
Second?
Second.
In favor?
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now you gotta call the design review
Yeah.
committee
Yeah,
to
now-
order.
All over.
That's a whole different packet.
Yeah.
Haven't fun yet.
Oh my gosh. Okay. The Kingston Springs Design Review Committee meeting now comes to order. Roll call, Keith Allgood, Tony Thompson, Tony Gross.
Here.
Mike Hargis.
Here.
Lauren Hill, here. Mike Patino.
Here.
Craig Kitch, Marie Spafford. Here. Bob Stoller. We have a quorum. Sharon Armstrong.
Here.
John Lawless.
Here.
Okay, motion to approve the 10 August 23 Design Review Committee meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion to approve the March 14, 24 Design Review Committee meeting agenda.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Old business, there is none. New business, recommendation to the Kingston Regional Planning Commission, Nobel Signs, 121B, Liven Hills Road, considerations of signage, recommendation of the Design Review Committee to the Kingston Springs Regional Planning Commission.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If you will look at your design review packet, the very last page, just like this, The application was submitted, the signage was reviewed, it fits within the sign ordinance, is an acceptable size, does not violate anything. To give you detail on the location, apologize, it's allergy season. At the Sunoco location, the empty bay is a liquor store. So they are asking for, you are the recommending body to the planning commission for the approval of the sign. So you can see that it's 4 by 5 feet, which is 20 square feet, which is what's allowed in the sign ordinance. So I have reviewed it, looked at it, it fits on the building, it does not cause any obstruction of view, it doesn't go above the header. Mr. Noble is here, I have informed Mr. Noble that it's been reviewed and it is compliant.
I'd make a motion that we recommend approval of the sign to the Kingston Springs Planning Commission.
Second.
Motion and second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion to recess the design review committee.
Oh, you actually need to adjourn this.
Adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. The design review committee is adjourned.
Call the next one back to
Now
Planning
number
Commission
2,
back to order.
Now we will call the planning commission back to order.
reconvene.
I'm not new at this or anything, but I'm getting there.
It's number 2 that I included the language for you under noble signs. You reconvene.
Oh, all right, so we just reconvened?
You just hammer the gavel, reconvene. There we go.
Okay, planning commission has reconvened.
I make a motion that we accept the recommendation of the Design Review Committee to approve the sign.
Second.
Motion made and second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion,
Doesn't get any more Mayberry than that.
All right, here we go.
okay. Is there any further discussion we need to bring up at this time? We do?
Got one more item. Item B.
B, new business B.
Okay.
I mean,
Recommendation by Kingston Springs Planning Commission, concept review application, property located at 173 Liven Hills Road regarding proposed from C2 Highway Commercial to I1 Light Industrial District.
Towards the back of your packet, you will find the concept review application that was filed under the heading of the Buchanan, I don't know what the REV stands for, that could be a lot of things. Living Trust. The person who filed the application is Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, he's here with us tonight. This is 173 Liven Hills Road, a 3-acre lot down by the box factory on Liven Hills Road. That was the subject of a concept review discussion last month for the landscaping, mulching, delivery service.
Right.
Okay, so Mr. Collins and I have spoken somewhat at length about his plans for this. He is not the owner of the property. I spoke to the realtor agent last week, Amanda Bell. They are aware of this application with the Planning Commission. And I think that, as I understand, and Chris, please feel free to come up. As I understand Mr. Collins, his proposal is to have a fair number of flex spaces, buildings on this lot, and have whatever that business is. I think some of the examples that he used were people who build furniture or maybe make custom signs, and then have the smaller portion of the building in the rear be kind of a warehouse or places where they could put what they make until they deliver them. I advised Mr. Collins that that is available under the current zoning of C2. We allow, as you know, with Power Technologies and other buildings that have been built recently, we allow those activities on this lot in C2 as long as the warehouse space is subordinate, both in size and in use, to the commercial space. So he still has asked, could this property be rezoned to I2? And or I1, I'm sorry, we only have one industrial district. For the same reasons that we discussed in the past when these proposals have come up in the C2 zone, you have a limited amount of commercial space in the town. Rezoning to I2, regardless of the plan that's currently on your table, would open up the district to every industrial use within the zone. Some of those uses are quite intense. None of the lots or locations in this area could accommodate the traffic, the footprint, the infrastructure, or the uses in some cases of industrial. So I've advised him that. We had a long discussion, but he still wanted to come and talk to you about rezoning it to industrial. So with that, my recommendation is that the use that he's proposing as described is perfectly doable within the zone that you have, without increasing the intensity of the use in that area. Industrial, as you know, is the heaviest use. And there are some uses that the traffic issues that we have and the infrastructure issues that we have would be very difficult to absorb along that corridor. So that's the staff recommendation.
Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, I
Okay.
was just gonna ask you what
Yeah,
do you
so-
think is the advantage?
Well, it's just 90% of these like commercial flex spaces that be developed are kind of fall under the industrial thing just because of one, the warehouse size, and the parking. I think with industrial it's 1 per 1,000 versus like commercial I think is what, 4 per 1,000, something like that.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
Being rude, you just have to address the.
Yeah, no,
If those are
I've
your
been dealing
questions.
with a lot of numbers today, and forgive me, I was maybe wrong,
It's
but
perfectly okay. The parking intensity, to answer that, is based on the use.
Okay.
Not zoning
Not-
district.
Yeah.
So
okay,
the
then I
parking
may have misread
regulations
that, or
address-
thinking another district or
They
county or something.
define all of the uses throughout your zoning ordinance, whether it's residential, whether it's school, whether it's whatever it is. And it's based on the particular use at the time an application is filed for development there. The downside of this, as I see it for someone who buys this 3-acre lot, is our lot coverage restriction in the industrial areas is 50%. So you take a 3-acre tract and it's just been reduced, its usable space to 1.5 acres.
What's the commercial lot usage?
Lot usage in commercial is not restricted.
Not restricted.
So as long as you are not offensive to your neighbor, you stay on your own lot, you're wall to wall. So there's very little restriction in C2, so that reduces the usability of this lot by 50%, which from an economic standpoint doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It doesn't maximize the use of the lot to accommodate that. The intensity is another question. If you're talking about a business flex space or a commercial flex space, that doesn't come with heavy industrial use. It doesn't come with heavy waste. As you know, we had a company that does printing. A lot of those chemicals are really harmful, very hard to contain, very hard to clean when you put them in your stormwater system. So the intensity of the use is the reason why this corridor is not zoned industrial. The box plan existed before the zoning layer was done. It was there before, so it's granted.
Well, yeah, but
So in this particular case, the intensity, regardless of what's proposed, you know, he may buy it, sell it tomorrow. I'm not saying you would, but he may. Once you zone it, it opens it to everything in the industrial zone. And some of those uses are not congruent with that area because of its uses as a place for people to stay overnight, a place for people to eat, a place for people to get gas, a place for people to operate businesses. Industrial is an imposition in that kind of activity. So that's staff recommendation.
well, the industrial was my first choice just because it's easier to find tenants on that space. But I don't know if you include the photos that I pictured of the buildings.
I'm sorry, you're gonna have to.
Okay.
Touch that.
No, okay, there's no photos, but pretty much what the building is, it's, they'll be sectioned off in 2,000, roughly at a starting space of 2,000 square feet. There would be probably 300 or 400 of office space when you walk in, bathroom, whatever, and then the rest of that space will be open for whatever the case might be, whether workshop, display area, whatever the case. Some of the tenants would be like a commissary, your skilled trades, even event setters, studios. It goes on and on. Just however someone can just take a blank canvas and just go from there. If that's something that's doable, or that y'all would think that would be doable on a commercial space with that zoning, then I'll be happy to proceed down that road. Just in my past experience, it usually falls under industrial.
I mean, Tyler Technologies would be in a commercial lot. I mean, they're doing light manufacturing. They've got, they've got all kinds of sheet metal fabricating equipment in there, and that kind of stuff, welding and those sorts of things are
Okay.
actually happening within that zone there. And I assume that's kind of what you're thinking about, is maybe, like, I think I could probably rent a space for me and take a few of my milling machines and lathes and stick them in there, and I'd probably be fine, would I not?
You could. The reason, Mr. Collins, for the resistance to industrial is once that lot is zoned industrial, while you may describe uses and leasing to people based on a particular set of uses, it opens the district regardless of what you submit
yeah.
to every
Completely
single
under your-
use.
yeah.
Some of those uses are very intense, and they are not. There's adjacent to this residential, adjacent to commercial, that we also have floodplains adjacent to this area that are not congruent with heavy industrial use. And once you open that door, if you bought it, built it out, decided to sell it, the next owner could then place any of those industrial warehousing uses. So they have 3 barriers in Kingston Springs that surface in that general area at every discussion. Traffic is pretty much a saturation level with no potential to widen the road. We have a number of people in relatively large subdivisions that live on the other side of the overpass, so we're always concerned about emergency services provision, because that would force them to drive a really long way around in the event of a fire or a medical emergency. So that occurs to us for traffic. The other thing is the number of uses that are tolerated in industrial that cause an impact to the environment. This is a very water saturated community. There are blue line streams everywhere. The area where C2 is located now, just across the road, is adjacent to the river. It's the pathway that the buildings that were lifted from their foundations took to the river during the flood. All of that means that whatever occurs there, in the event of a heavy rain or a flood with all blue line saturation underneath the ground, migrates into the ground. That then goes into the river, from where the drinking water comes, and the more that goes into the river, the more costly it is to treat. Then you have to worry about the sewage issues, which are done in step tanks, which are located on every single lot, tie into the main. In the event of heavy saturation or some chemical use, that's more money they're gonna have to spend when those liquids go into the lagoon to be treated, and it raises the cost. It also limits the use of that lot to 50%, which means if you had an industrial use, as the ones you're describing, there would be insufficient lot space to accommodate parking, the step tanks that are gonna be required for each building, access in and out in driveways. Those types of things take up room on the lot.
Yep.
So it would limit that to the point that it would be a very small footprint by the time you actually got to the buildings.
Yeah. Now, the square footage, which is, the idea was to do it in phases, but the number I was going for would hit that 50% mark. But
I don't disagree with you with your concept.
Yeah.
What you're, I think, and I want to make sure that I understand what you're saying, is if you had a 20,000 square foot building, then you're looking at maybe 25% of that being the actual office, and then there would be a workshop, and then maybe residual warehouse space in the back.
well, it'd be up to each tenant, but it'd be
Right.
roughly 20% Like the smallest space available would be that 2,000 square feet and like a 300 or 400 square foot office. So it's from what I've talked to my
Less
brokers.
space for a tenant to determine what the uses were going to be within the footprint of the building that was on the ground.
Yes.
So, back to what I shared with you before. Once it's industrial,
Yeah.
there's
Oh,
no coming back from that.
no, I completely get it. It's just my first
And the
choice.
other thing is the warehousing use of
Yeah.
the space for C2 is limited for a reason. Because warehousing, the more warehousing you have, the more large trucks you have, the more traffic you have, the more difficulty.
But ultimately, I mean, it sounds like something you could accomplish in the current zoning and actually might get more use out of the property in some respects for it, if you did want to expand it.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess calling it zoning it industrial, then you could maybe call it a small industrial park or something like that.
Yeah, well,
which is maybe
it's
kind
more of
reading
a,
the meaning, but.
I've heard it called a business park or office warehousing. It's bunch of whatever you want to call it, but
Well, you may be thinking about your tenants, you know, in terms of they are more industrial than they are retail or.
yeah, no, the
You may be
granted,
thinking about that, but the point I'm trying to make here is that's probably gonna fit under the C2 anyway.
Okay.
So,
so all right,
and then you got the opportunity to use another acre and a half in case it goes well and you wanna expand it and put another row in.
Okay.
You could do that with the 3 acres, but you can't do that if it's an acre and a half. You're probably done when you build the first one.
makes sense.
Because of the use restriction on light industrial. So I think you can get home with a C2 and still be happy with the available tenants that are out there.
Okay.
And I think for them, the comfort level is that they're not opening up that section of the corridor that's the most highly traveled lane of traffic in this town to industrial uses that are maybe incompatible.
Right.
Because they would have no control.
Makes
of
sense.
that thing.
No, yeah, I get that. Yeah, it's, what, can I ask what, the best way that y'all would like me to proceed if, to leave it as C2, what you would like to see from me? Like any red flags, like traffic studies would be, like that might be a big issue. I mean, I don't want to spend a ton of money at the end of the day if it just, the traffic is just traffic, like.
I think that, Mr. Collins, I'm sorry, is it okay if I respond to him?
Please do.
The traffic question has come up for every development along that corridor. The McPherson project, the Thornton's project, the Sunoco, everybody's done a traffic study. What we do as a courtesy to applicants who are pursuing a path of development is we provide you with a copy of every one of those traffic studies that are already done. Because we want that information as it moves from one study to the next study to be consistent. And we want it included. We don't want you just to study the traffic on your lot. We want to know what the impact is on the corridor and the grid. So you're provided with that information. You're also provided with a TPR that was conducted by the state during the 2019 year, and I think adopted finally at the end of that year, because there were certain things that we needed to have included in that report for alternate travel patterns through this area to relieve what happens when there's a wreck, there's gridlock. For them, their considerations are public safety first. What are you gonna do if you can't get across? You know, what is your alternate route? So that somewhat confines and dictates what can go in that area. So that would be something that would be done at the time that you actually put pen to paper and suggested, here's what I want to build. When you get that outline, I want 5 buildings, they're going to be 2,000 square feet of building. You know at that point in the sketch, the original or the preliminary, where that step type is going to go, how much parking you're going to need, because parking is predicated on use, not on zoning district.
Okay, I may have missed, I've dealt with other counties.
Okay, it
Yeah.
is in some jurisdictions, it's predicated on the zoning district. Here it's not, it's predicated on use. Kingston Springs requires 10 by 20 parking spaces. That's very unusual across most towns. But as vehicles grew and accidents happened more often, you needed that space. They don't vary that, it never varies. Other considerations are sewer capacity. water capacity, because sometimes the use predicts how much water is gonna be required. Sometimes the use predicts how much sewage treatment is gonna be required. Some types of businesses are very water consumptive, and that creates runoff and stormwater and wastewater, which has to be treated at the taxpayer's expense. So, well, actually here they're an enterprise, so it's at the owner's expense.
Yeah.
Because taxpayer does not go towards that. So
So-
having said all of that, the next thing they need to see from you is, I guess, that you can't present an actual plan unless you own the property.
All right, and I just don't feel comfortable buying the property unless I get a plan approved.
Right, I understand what you're
yeah.
saying, but you can bring a preliminary here. They're very good at giving feedback on everything. Much as you did with the RV park.
Okay.
You know, you just kind of did a preliminary, you brought it to them, they gave you their comments, their feedback, because the question on the table was, can you embrace this? You know, will you embrace this type of development? So that's kind of where you are with this, only you're one step removed because this actually belongs to someone.
Yeah, so I won't, if I do a site plan and do everything that is required that y'all would like to see, it would be, just that final step of approval won't be done until I own the property, correct? Like, you can still kind of say, yes, this is good, this,
You would have to have a document, a legal document,
okay,
from the present owner.
okay,
They cannot approve plans, entertain rezoning, anything that affects a piece of property without owner consent. No one has the authority to speak on
so like a
behalf
power of
the owner.
attorney?
So you're gonna have to have something from the owner
Okay,
that grants you that authority to appear, just as they give to their engineer or their architect when they come here, or Mr. Noble for a sign. You know, that has to happen. You have to have their consent. There have been cases that have been litigated, much to everybody's distress, where people have gone and gotten properties rezoned that they did not own without the owner's consent. That will usually light up a fight pretty quick.
Hey,
yeah,
we do appreciate your interest in investing in our community. Let's make sure
Absolutely.
let's make sure that's pretty clear. And secondly, you know, you can work with your attorney and your architect that's gonna draw up plans to kind of tell them the situation here. And you might be able to talk the owner into a purchase option kind of document where, you know, you reserve the right to buy it, assuming that the plan's approved. I don't know if that works for Sharon or not, but I'm sure your attorney could come up with something where you're actually purchasing an option from the owner to buy the property pending approval. That might work. So
It
I'm no
absolutely
lawyer,
works.
but you need, you know, I've seen that done a time or two. So, that way you have an exclusive right to buy it. That protects you.
Yeah.
So they don't sell it out
Yeah, no, I've been
money
burned.
to somebody else that
Yeah,
comes
yeah.
in with a different offer, you know. So just some things to think about, but hey, we do appreciate your interest in investing in Kingston Springs. And I think you're hearing here, probably a lot of things that maybe you didn't want to hear, but we
No,
want
I was
you to,
here
we
last
want you
month,
to work.
I was
work with
expecting
it.
this.
We want you to work with us.
Yeah, you got a
We're
careful
trying
last
to
minute.
help you.
Yeah,
Believe it or
yeah.
not, we're from the government, we're trying to help you.
Famous last words. Thank you. I appreciate your time. I will work on getting someone with a lawyer and kind of get whatever. But yeah, I mean, besides that, is there anything else
I'm sorry,
that?
Chris, you don't have to go that far. I apologize for interrupting. These are standard real estate documents,
Mhm.
and the seller's real estate agent, Amanda Bell, is completely proficient in how to do
Oh yeah, no, she's
these
great.
agreements. They do them all the time.
Yeah.
It simply allows you to purchase if they approve your plan going forward. It allows you an escape clause if they don't.
Mm-hmm.
Contingent.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Contingent on it.
that's the contract that we have now. Is contingent on approval. Okay. But is there anything else that y'all would like to know about the project? Because I have a pretty good idea before next steps. Because I can answer pretty much anything.
I think we're good. I think
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
pretty good understanding of it, I mean.
Okay. All right. Yeah, just
Yeah.
checking. Yep. Good deal.
Thank you, though.
All right. Thanks.
Appreciate that. Okay, so we need a motion.
To adjourn.
No, this
No?
is concept of.
Oh, concept,
Yeah,
okay.
That's why it's down under other, there's no action taken, it's just.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Adjourned.